back to Timo's Dinky and Detailing. Today I'm going to be doing a French Dinky toy. It's a Dinky 25Q Studebaker truck. So there are many different versions of this toy. This is the pickup truck. And this is in pretty decent condition. It's chipped up, but when you look closely, the paint, it's actually been repainted. It's been painted with a brush, both the red and the yellow. And it's been done actually pretty well, so the child did a very effective job and then continued to play with it, and it got pretty chipped up in the process. I've done a model like this recently that was it was the same casting for the body and chassis, but it didn't have the bed, and I fitted a different bed to it. There you can see Dinky Toys made in France. And it's an interesting model because this casting, you can see the red paint has been painted. It's been repainted, and same with the yellow. This chassis appears on several different models with different boxes and such on the back, including a wrecker. And as a result, it has an interesting shape, which I'll show you later. Here you can see that the chassis is bent and the box is sticking upwards. So I'm going to try and straighten this thing out. You can look in here. See these grooves that are in the bottom? There's cracks very clearly visible there. So it has, and it's a weak point, those grooves, and you wonder why would they put those grooves? Well, those grooves are there so you can have a shaft and a crankshaft and a little gearbox for lifting a tipper. So there's a spare tire on the bottom, which is unusual. And to get get the base off and take it apart, I'm using my usual method, and that's now my usual method, and that's to use the tiny little carbide burr and the Dremel tool. So I go in, and I find this is handy. I used to put it on the drill press or into the milling machine, and I would drill them carefully. And I'm finding it's even easier to do with the Dremel tool, which I resisted for a long time because I considered it to be noisy. But my milling machine is more noisy, so I'm pretty happy with the work I'm getting done with the Dremel tool. So this spare tire is holding the whole bed onto the chassis. And so I'm just grinding that off. I actually tried knocking it through with a punch, but that didn't work. So now I've ground the head off, and I don't want to damage the wheel, so I don't want to grind off too much. And it's not working. So I got the tire off of there. I'm just not able to. Underneath there, you can see there used to be a hook, but the hook is broken off. But it's still in there. So I bring back the punch. This took me a while to get this thing off, and in a way I felt like it was a safe way. So finally the punch worked, and I got that thing out, and you can see that this is actually a real rivet. It's a piece of metal with a head on one end, and you deform the other end so that it holds the parts together. The posts on the bottom are sort of a different kind of rivet, I guess, and maybe there's even a name for it that I'm not aware of. Because you deform the top of it to hold the part on, but it's not a shaft that goes all the way through. It's a little tower that's cast into the body. So you can see I was able to get the wheel off, but it's not able to go through the tiny little hole that's there for that little hook. So I'm just going to use the parallel pliers and squeeze together the end. So that was a challenge for sure. I wanted to show you that it did take a while. Actually, I cut out a whole bunch because I was trying to take it out with a punch originally. So this is the rivet, and I've got to figure out what I'm going to do, and we'll have a look at it later. While at this point I'm still taking this thing apart. Now here's another place you can see that it's been painted. The axle has been painted yellow here, and I'm just going to cut it off, and this is with my modified pair of pliers where I've cut most of the jaws off except for the tiny little bit of the cutting one, so I get the maximum leverage, and it's very easy for me to cut those axles off, and I can reach under a model and do it. So the other axle is the front one that's comes separate as soon as you separate the base, and I filed that one so I can see how long the axle is for when I make new axles, which you'll see later on. Now some of those tires obviously broke right off, and a couple of the other ones are spongy, but I'm going to replace all of them. So I had another hook there, but it has a wrong size of hole. So here I've set up some parallels and some blocks and my giant C-clamp, and I'm bending the entire chassis back into the correct position again. So there it moved, and it seems to be straight now. I'm roughly putting the ruler in behind because you kind of can see even in the curved body part if it's lined up, and there you can see with the box on the back it looks pretty good. So this stage I go through, there's 3 holes in the bottom that have to be drilled out so that I can thread them and put screws to put that sheet steel base. Now I've drilled those holes. I speed this up a little bit, and I go in with my tap. So this is a 256 tap. I'm using a smaller screw than I normally would because the parts where I have to drill for the rivets are a little bit smaller, and so I had to go in with a smaller tap so that it wouldn't break out the sides. These ones are pretty robust, but the front one not so. I don't know why I used those screws. Made sense at the time. I think if I put a 440 screw there, you would see that it's much bigger. So all the parts are taken apart and they go into this little bucket, and the whole thing goes outside because it's caustic soda. So I've got the bucket inside a bigger bucket because when I put the caustic soda it boils and splashes up. I put some caustic soda in before on this one. You can see it's already working. But I find when I pour it on top it's much more effective. And you can see that it's taking that red paint off because it's colored the whole thing red. So with all the paint stripped, I can go now and wire brush what I can. I don't use the Dremel tool wire brush because maybe I will if I can find a wheel that doesn't throw all its little needles around the room. So I get the bigger parts, and you can see there's some casting lines on there. And I'm going to remove the casting lines because they're in a very obvious spot, and it would make the model look better if it's all nice and smooth. And I do this on this part with the file. Other parts I can't get in there with the file, so I use some sandpaper. Mostly the file does it though. There's not too many casting lines on this one, mostly just those 2. So once that's done, and I go into the spray booth and I spray some white primer. I'm going to use the same colors as it came in because they just happen to be the opposite colors that were on the previous Studebaker truck. Now for the wheels are going to be red, like the box, and so I'm using pink primer on those parts. Now for the body, I'm going with a spray bomb. If I was really carefully trying to match the colors, which I'm not, I would mix up a yellow and use the airbrush. But in this case, the whole thing comes out a solid color, and the spray bomb is effective for this model. This is the model for the beginning of the summer. This is the first one after the Canada Day model, and usually the first model I get out after the Canada Day model is in September. So I'm quite busy in the summertime, so I'm actually squeezing this project in, and I had started it already before Canada Day, so it's on the roll. So when I spray this, I use a magnet to hold it, because if I grab onto something, I can't get the paint everywhere. So there, beautiful coat of paint. So this is the rivet. Now this is quite a challenge, what I'm going to do here. I don't like to, if you've been watching my videos, I don't like to hammer at my models too much. I've done it on some of the old ones, which you may have seen that I've reposted on this new channel, and it's a pretty hairy thing. You build a whole model and you put it together, and the very last thing you're doing is you're putting the thing in a vise, or holding it with vice grips, and then you're hitting the thing with a hammer, or else you're coming in with a hammer drill with a nail set in it, and you're furiously spinning and hammering on this thing, and whichever way you do it to hammer that mushroom in, there's a huge danger that your hammer slips, or the nail set that's spinning slips, and then it hits the body work and it screws up your paint job. So it's kind of something I'm scared of. So I'm always trying to find, and you'll see how I do it if you haven't seen it already. Now this one, this rivet, I can't figure out a way of replacing it, or I don't want to hammer it down there, and I can't use my other method because this is a tiny screw that I'm going to try to put into the rivet instead of mushrooming the end. It's a 0.80 screw, so it's what engineers call teeny tiny. The threads are extremely small too, so I've made a special spacer. You saw I put the rivet in there because the rivet has a head and it won't go into the collet because the head is bigger than the shaft. So I have to put in a spacer, which I 3D printed, which isn't ideal. I don't get perfect grip, so as I'm drilling this thing, it also pushes the rivet backwards into the collet. It cuts it, but it's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. So I drilled as far as I dare drill it, and now I'm going to take it out of the lathe, but I'm going to keep it in this collet. That's what this little thing is called that holds this thing. So there, I've got a hole drilled in the end, which I want to tap. And the problem is with the 0.80, the tap is this. It's like it's done for needlework or something. It's so tiny, and yet I've got this big handle on top of it, and it hasn't broken. Now it is a problem that I'm worried about. I actually wound up putting it in the drill press with a tap guide to try and tap it, but the problem is the hole is not deep enough. The tap has a very long taper, so it looks like you've gone in a long way, but when you thread in the screw, which I'm doing here, it doesn't go in far enough. So I'm getting maybe maybe 3 threads making contact, so it's not going to work. So I'm going to solve it with a different solution, which is going to be similar to my axles. So here are my wheels. There's 5 of them, and I'm putting these are um, O-rings that happen to be exact size of most of these early Dinky toy tires. And this axle, this is a piece of axle. I'm going to be cutting and making my own axle, and it's a piece of 2mm stainless steel tubing. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just using the collet block to hold it out so I can set this thing up so it's not falling all over the place, and then mark where I want to cut the axle so that it's just exactly the correct length. And I double check that I've marked it in the right place, and then take it off. And now I have a little mark, which is probably very hard to see in the video. And then I use the Dremel tool to cut it off. Now the ends are all sharp and burred, so I go in with my super smooth file. It's a good quality file. I would recommend a real file. This is a Nicholson file. It's made in Canada, and it's fantastic. This is my favorite file, especially for all these small projects. So here I'm using this riffler. It has kind of a sharp edge on it, so I'm able to file a little notch in it so I can see where I'm cutting with the Dremel tool again. And then there's another piece. This piece is going to be my replacement for the rivet that holds the spare tire and holds the bed onto the back of the truck. So I'm going to use the same principle to hold the bed on the back of the truck as I do for the wheels and axles. Now you're going, why am I putting this back in here? Am I cutting something else? No, I'm gonna do what I tried to do with the original rivet, and that is I'm going to try and tap this thing. So I've got this tiny little tap. It's really such a fine tap. I don't know how I didn't break it already doing this stuff. It must be a very, very high quality tap. I got this from my son's friend, and his grandfather passed away, and he was trying to clear a bunch of stuff out of the basement, and I found a bunch of these taps, and these tiny little taps were included. I never had 080 taps before. They are so tiny, it's unbelievable. So of course the hole goes all the way through, so it's deep enough that I could get a thread to go a little bit deeper, although it's kind of dodgy and I'm scared to do it. But here I'm screwing in that tiny little screw, and you can see, okay, that's about as far as I can get. So I got about half of the screw in. So that's going to be enough, but I'm going to have to make the screw shorter. So I looked for a piece of scrap metal, and lo and behold, here's a hole that's already drilled and threaded. For 080, obviously I had done this process before. What I do when I'm cutting a screw, first of all, I don't want the thing to get lost. It's tiny. So I screw it into a hole, into a piece of scrap material, and then I cut it off, and it serves multiple purposes. It holds the screw from running away, and once I've cut off the excess length, and see, I use what I can to flatten. I use the edge of the cutting disc, and then I come with the file. So then the other purpose, like you can see, it'd be hard to do this trying to hold it. How do you hold a screw? Well, this is how you hold a screw. So then the other thing that happens is there's a burr, because you're not going to avoid it. It's so tiny. But when you take this out, it passes through the thread that's cut into the aluminum, Might be better to use steel, but it takes the burr off of the end of the screw. So now it can go into this little piece of tubing. And that's going to give me enough purchase to hold that spare tire on the bottom, and I can even put a little bit of pressure on it with that tiny, tiny thread. At about this point, you're probably thinking, and I certainly was thinking, that maybe it would be just easier to glue the thing together. But I was determined. I wanted to look as original as possible, so I needed that head to be good. I could have done it. I could have done it easier, but I wanted to see how much trouble I had to go through. So of course the original rivet has a big head on one end, and so to do that, of course I've got a hole, and I've got these nails, these small nails. So I'm going to cut this nail. I'm going to cut this nail off shorter so that it'll fit in, and I'm just going to glue it in place. And of course the glue probably isn't going to be strong enough. So there's my rivet head. All these little parts are so tiny. So that fits there nicely. So now let's see if we can put this thing together. So this is 5-minute epoxy, just the same way as I make my axles. Of course, the problem with the 5-minute epoxy is it's not as strong as a rivet. It's not as strong as a mushroomed end of a piece of steel. And here I am. I'm going to have a rivet head that's glued in with epoxy glue. So that's not going to be good enough because it's got to hold the thing together. So I'm going to strengthen it a little. I'm looking at that and going, it's not going to hold anything. So there it is beside the original rivet. So here's my solution. This is my cut-off thing, and it's those jaws aren't very sharp, but I can put a tremendous amount of pressure even before I actually cut through. So I don't cut through, but I put a crimp on it. So now that stainless steel is gripping tightly to that steel nail. So now I'm mixing up some paint for the airbrush, and I'm trying to get, this is the color I want to get, is the Dinky color that they came up with originally for the seats, and which is a red, but it's a slightly orange, kind of bright red. That's what I'm after. So here I've 3D printed an interior, and it's this exact same interior for the other Studebaker I made, so I didn't have to design a new one. Here I'm adjusting the paint so that it's very light, because I need to get into tiny little corners inside, and I can't use the heavy setting or it'll put too much paint in there and flood it. So this is me getting around those chairs and getting the floor painted. So this is the paint I use for Dinky grills and bumpers when I'm brushing it on. I've already figured out that this is going to be way, way, way too difficult for me to tape up and then spray. So I've speeded it up so you can see it going. So I use this paint when I know I can only use the brush. So now this interior is designed to hold a front window. So I've got this window material. It's just plastic from some packaging, which you can find all over the place. And I have a little slot in the front of this 3D printed seats, and so I need to cut a tab into the window, And that green part is masking tape on both sides of the plastic. That's the clear part of the window. So I can handle the thing and I don't get my fingerprints all over it, or I don't have to clean it at the end. So this is a brilliant thing I thought of. So I can do all of this work and do the test fitting and get it all right. And then look at, I bend the windshield as well because it's in the model. It's a two-piece windshield, so that it's not one piece of glass across. There's two pieces, and there's an angle. So I need to get that angle as well so that it fits better and looks correct. So in the interior, there's a steering wheel. It's very, very fine steering wheel, but it looks great, so I'm happy with that. And all I'm doing is painting it black. Usually Dinky Toy would have had black steering wheel with a red interior. So these are my mushrooms for the axles, which I cut earlier. And what I do, I'm not going to show you polishing all of them. I'm just going to show you how I polish the one. I get it into this pin vise. I have a few of these now because they're so handy. And I put it into the buffing wheel. And I didn't even put new stuff on the buffing wheel because this takes only a second or two to take this finish off and make it shiny silver instead of this weird bronze finish. These are some kind of decorative nails for woodworking or upholstery, or I don't know what they're for, but they're the perfect size for Dinky Toy wheel mushrooms. So this is the front axle. It's assembled by itself away from the model. And I put my 5-minute epoxy, and then I put one of these nails with the polished head, and it looks beautiful. As I said earlier, it's not as strong as the real thing. So if you're going to give this to a child to play, it's probably a bad idea. This is strictly for a display model. So all that precision measuring is coming handy now. I enjoy showing this to you because it just looks so elegant. And it sure beats the heck out of spinning a nail set in a drill on all your fresh, right, just in millimeters from your fresh paint. So now we're getting assembly ready. So I take the tape off of that windshield, and that goes on in the slot. There's big holes in the front of the slot because you can't 3D print a slot like that because the resin will get inside it and plug it all up. So you have to have a huge drain holes, and conveniently I can put glue there to hold the windshield in. In that case, I used the hobby sticky glue. It takes a little longer to dry, but it's simpler to use. So instead of trying to put another hook on there or making a custom hook, so the thing doesn't need a hook, but I need that piece of metal because it was in the original design, so it's got the right spacing. So I just cut off the fragment of the hook and I'll put it in there as a spacer, and that's it. So I'll clean the burrs off of it so that it won't scratch anything in the process. So that's ready. And now I've painted the head there. I didn't show you I was painting it. That's the rivet that I made with the little screw on the bottom. So time to assemble it. So I line up the hole. I put my rivet and tell me how it looks. It looks pretty good. So this is the wheel that came off the bottom. It was actually damaged underneath, probably damaged in the process of hammering that rivet. I got my screw in there and I got it a couple turns in and it's pretty good. The real problem with this one is that's the only holding point on this thing. So it looks pretty nice, but look, it's loose. So all that trouble, and what am I going to do? The darn thing's loose. So there, with the windshield on, the base goes in, or the seats go in. I put in the front axle, and I forgot to take these little screws out of here. So I take them out. They're actually nicely painted yellow, and I'm able to get the Allen key in there. So I'm just going to reuse these. So there's the base. It looks beautiful. Looks almost like new. So now I get those screws in there. And it looks pretty good, but look at how shaky that is. So that's a problem, and I'm going to use the sticky glue, tacky glue. It's a hobby glue. It dries pretty fast. It dries completely transparent. And then straighten it up. So now it's time for some decoration. I looked up original Studebaker logo from about the era. They had different logos through their history, and this was from that era, from 30s and 40s. And I didn't let this one soak long enough, so I had my thumb holding the decal, but once I put the decal there, it wasn't going to move, so I got it pretty good, so I'm happy with it, but if I had to move it, it was impossible. If you press down on it with your thumb. So these are printed from the laser printer, and what I'd painted on there was the floor lacquer. That's the acrylic floor lacquer that people use to dip their windows into that are scratched up, and it fills the scratches and makes them look really shiny. And I use it on these decals because I find that the laser printed decals on these blue back water slide foils, they don't handle it. If I have to move the decal around and I hit the ink, it's gonna peel some of it off. So I wind up painting these decals with the floor polish, and then that way they survive better. So I invented that name. Maybe there's really an Atlas Oil company somewhere and they're going to sue me or something. Of course, they can only sue me if I actually make money on these things, which I don't. And now I've 3D printed some steel drums, and to decorate them, the steel drums of course have to have markings on them so you know when it was made and what they contain and where they're supposed to be going, and keep track of them. So they get numbers and letter combinations that mean something to somebody. So I just put some random, interesting looking numbers and letters. You can see I painted them. I put tape. I put these things on there and I painted them, so they're kind of painted to the tape. So the bottoms are going to look a little bit ragged, but they're going to be inside the back of the truck, so nobody's going to notice it anyway. So you can get the idea. I think they look pretty cool. Not quite authentic, but it's a toy. It should look like a toy. That's why it has the bright colors. And people are going to say, well, you should have weathered them, make it look like oil spilling out of them. And I thought about it a lot. I said, nah, this is a toy a child's going to go and buy in a store, so it's got to look like, everything's got to look like it's new and clean. let the child mess it all up. That's part of the fun of having a Dinky toy, is you play with the thing and it shows its wear. So here we've got what we started with, just to remind you. And this is what it looks like now. So I think that looks just fantastic, and I'm really pleased with how it came out. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, then be sure to subscribe and share and like. Especially hit the like button. It's that little thumbs up, because that really helps, and it's not a huge commitment from you, and it would help me out to try and bring back some of my subscribers from the old channel. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Until next time, be seeing you.